Hey, what's up, everyone? This is me, Dre. I'm just here at work, getting ready to go back for my break. I wanted to make this video because a lot of people, especially the liberals out there, are wondering how Donald Trump won, and it's very simple. Let's take a little bit of a history lesson back to the Nixon era, because this is where this all started, called the Southern Strategy, and Donald Trump used something similar. Basically, you're running for a public office and you need as many supporters as possible. You need supporters who, have a certain way of thinking. So when you get onto a platform such as live TV and you start making comments such as Mexicans aren't bringing their best, they're not sending their best. They're sending drug dealers, they're rapists, they're criminals. It's going to appeal to a certain segment of America who feels the same way. When you have this presidential candidate who is saying, well, Muslims are a problem, I plan on banning Muslims, who's that going to appeal to? People who do not like Muslims. Richard Nixon did something similar, because back when he was running for president, he couldn't say nigger. But what he did say is, there's a problem with the inner city. We have these drug dealers, these criminals out on the streets. You should fear for your life. Who did this appeal to? This appealed to Southern whites. Back then, when he was running, these Southern whites were Democrats, and Richard Nixon was a Republican. So he swung those supporters to the Republican side. So in this day and age, pretty much all the Southern states are Republican states or red states. This is how Richard Nixon gained the presidency. Ronald Reagan did the same thing, where he started talking about welfare queens and how they're milking the system, and good blue-collar taxpayers are suffering for it. Him and Nixon had campaigns where they started this war on drugs. All of a sudden, you see a commercial where you have someone with you hear a voice in the background narrating what's going on, a voice like Robert Stack, talking about how crime is on the rise, and it's quickly becoming the number one issue in America in the inner city and such. And then all of a sudden, as the camera pans, you see these flashing lights for a police car, and then you see good old Officer Bob, and he's detaining someone. Who is he detaining? He's detaining someone that has dark skin like myself, maybe someone Latino. And they started having these campaigns and these commercials where a lot of the detainees look like me. And then all of a sudden, there's this stigma through American society, even from the lowest class to the highest class, that started thinking, well, these black people and these Latinos, they're the ones that are bringing the drugs into the country. They're the ones that are committing these crimes, so they must be bad. So now, fast forward to 1995, there was a study where a group of people were asked randomly to close their eyes and imagine a drug dealer. 95% checked that they can imagine a black person being a drug dealer. Now, this is around a time when Clinton had his crime law go into effect, which targeted black and Latinos. So now you have this mass incarceration. So these are the things that Donald Trump has done by appealing to people who resent black people, by appealing to people who resent Mexicans, by appealing to people who don't like Muslims, who don't even know Muslims, people who would seem to think that because you have a hijab on your head, or you pray to the east, to Allah in the morning, these are the kind of people that are the real domestic terrorists. Not all of them, but they have a resentment. You appeal to the resentment of the people who you think will support you, and that's how you gain your support. It's called the Southern Strategy once again. John Ehrlichman was one of the members of Nixon's cabinet, and he spoke about how Nixon resented black people and resented drugs, and because he couldn't make it against the law, actually he was against the far left anti-war supporters, the people who did not like the Vietnam War. So he resented blacks and people who were against the Vietnam War, and you couldn't make it against the law, but he came up with campaigns against those quote unquote hippies and black people to target them in the inner city. They started bringing drugs into the inner city communities, and then they started targeting and bringing them down. He also brought down the Black Panther Party, who stood for the black community in terms of helping them to unify and rise up and be less reliant on the government. So Donald Trump, what he's done, and when you listen to his debates with Hillary Clinton, because they both did this, when they talked about how to bridge the gap, and the racial divide that's in this country, both of them, especially Donald Trump, started talking about fixing the inner city. And when people think about inner city, they primarily think about black people as though we're defective. So that's the whole problem. And a lot of his supporters are trying to come up with an excuse. Oh, we need someone to shake up DC who's not a politician. We need someone with the business acumen. And there's no doubt that Donald Trump, when it comes to dollars and cents, well, dollars at least, he understands how to manipulate the dollar, which is why he doesn't pay taxes and has gotten away with it. And his supporters are okay with that. But then all of a sudden, when you talk about Mexicans who are quote unquote milking the system and aren't paying tax dollars, these same supporters that are okay with Donald Trump have a problem with these Mexicans who they say are not paying taxes. So there's a double standard there. But anyhow, before I make this cut this video off, this is how Donald Trump won. Because the popular vote went to Hillary Clinton, but the electoral vote went to Donald Trump simply because of how the structure works. And the Southern strategy that he used, the same that Richard Nixon used, the same that Ronald Reagan used, the same that George Bush Sr. used, it worked to his advantage because it gave him the support that he needed, and that's how he won. Anyway, if you like this video, hope that you like, subscribe, and share. Don't forget to check me out on Facebook. Peace.